welcome to another hobby. I'm Austin. Today's hobby, we're continuing some Inktober, day 23, coming up near the end of the month now. Okay, we got Not Inktober, Cradle Inktober, and Kickin' the Creative. For Not Inktober, got Chupacabra. For Cradle Inktober, Glow. And for Kickin' the Creative, we've got Escape. Okay, I think I can work with that. Let's see if we get some inspiration from a art style. Ximena Arias. Hope I'm saying that correctly. Alright, let's see what this says about Chupacabra. Vampiric, sucks on the blood of goats, and varied physical description. Described as heavy creature, reptilian and alien-like, roughly the size of a small bear. Row of spines reaching from the neck to the base of the tail. So, a big ol' bear reptile with spines. I can do that. So I think this picture here with the person in the red dress is probably closest to what I'm gonna try and emulate style-wise as far as the environment goes. I think I'm gonna do something where somebody is running away from a Chupacabra in the background that maybe has glowing eyes. Maybe like a street light in the foreground that the person is just running into. Yeah, let's try something like that. I do like this image with the hands, and it has an example of something glowing in it that I can kind of use as reference, but I don't really have anywhere I can easily put this for reference without it kind of blocking where I want to work. So I think I'm just going to leave that tab up on my other monitor. I do like what's happening with the road here being curved and going into the hills in the background, but I also don't want to just copy this image outright one-to-one, so I think I'm gonna add a little bit to differentiate it, and for that I think I'm gonna want to use a perspective ruler. I don't want to put too much work into this background. Probably simplify it, keep it kind of blue, kind of like these mountains, and just with some darker areas and later areas to kind of show where the doors and windows are. But I don't want to spend too much time working on all the details and stuff for this because I don't want it to be the focus. On the other side, I want this to be like edge of the road and just kind of wilderness out here where I can use these same kind of mountains. Actually, I think I might want to take this background and flip it. And if I take this character, move them over a bit, then I can put the streetlights on the blank side instead of trying to put them in front of the buildings. It'll be a little bit harder to deal with, and I'll have to add lighting to the buildings, which I don't want to do. And then the Chupacabra itself, spines sticking up and big glowing eyes, make it look like it's more bear-like, prowling kind of after him. And I might have the lights in the back, these two in the background, and maybe going further back, be lit, and this one here be out, so it's not casting any light on the Chupacabra. And maybe it's implying that like wherever it goes, the lights go out or something. Let's put a couple stars in. Looks like with this, oh, I completely forgot. I should put the artist's name up. There we go. So it looks like with this art style of Ximena's, with that there's some like lighter grayish cloudy parts to the sky, like nebulas kind of thing. I'm gonna try and emulate that. For the stars, I wonder if there's a good brush for this. Maybe this droplet brush? Perfect. Exactly what I was looking for. Makes this nice and quick. Kind of like flicking paint off your fingers onto the canvas if you're doing traditional painting. Looks like the stars are pretty sparse in this image, so I'm going to keep it fairly sparse for this too. I'm just using a mask for the ground and the mountains and the buildings so that I can keep it separated from the sky easily and paint on it easily without going over the lines. handy tip. It allows you to do a lot more like non-destructive processes on your art. And what I mean by that is, if this were me just painting this color onto this layer, and later I wanted to change where the edge of the mountain is, you know, I could just erase a chunk off the top. But then if I wanted to go back on that down the line, I'd have to redraw it in. Whereas if you're using a mask, that color will always stay there. So even if I'll give you an example. Say I put, you know, a red spot on the mountaintop right here. If I were to use this mask to get rid of it, say I shrink down the mountain like so, and then later on I realize I want to bring it back, all I have to do is just add that back into the mask. And ta-da, that red spot is still there, because I'm not actually changing the color on the layer, I'm just changing what part of it is showing with the mask. Very handy for that kind of non-destructive process. I'm always a little unsure where to draw the line when it comes to using another artist's work as reference. Things like color picking, like I did for the sky and for the ground, or, you know, where taking composition, copying that where the line is between style and straight up plagiarism. But I feel like the fact that I'm not making money off these or anything, I'm not trying to sell them or pass it off as my original work without crediting the artists that I'm using as inspiration. I feel like I'm probably safe for the most part, and it's mostly for the purposes of practicing and learning for me. So I don't feel too bad about doing some color picking here and there and trying to like understand how the artist did what they did. I still try to change it a little to try and make it more my own. Like for this picture, I'm okay mostly, I guess, almost straight up copying how the mountains and ground are done and the sky to really kind of capture the style of the art, hopefully, and then making the subject very different because it's about this Chupacabra chasing this guy down the street. I'd like to know your opinions in the comments for what you think is, how far is too far? Is this too far in your opinion, what I'm doing here? Let me know. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can emulate this kind of sketchy style. I'm not sure what kind of medium that is. It looks like pencil, but it's a little bit more smooth. I suppose it could be like pastels or something digital maybe, but it also almost looks like pen. Let's see if I can kind of capture the look of it a little bit. I think that's looking pretty close enough for me to be happy with it. I think I want to rotate my canvas to make these lines easier. Doing kind of horizontal lines like this is difficult at this angle. Now I think maybe I need to plan out where my pools of light are going to be, because they're going to be on this road and I don't want to draw these lines in those spots. So let's figure that out first. Noticing my wrist is tending to move slightly at this kind of up towards the right angle, and I'm trying to keep it, you know, with the perspective lines more straight along. So I'm just gonna tilt the whole canvas a bit more so that the natural movements of my wrist follow that line a little better, rather than trying to consciously adjust where I'm making these lines to follow it. I'll just adjust the canvas to follow where I'm making these lines. Apologies when try not to talk when I'm doing these large lines, because I realize it's probably picking up on the microphone, me scraping across my tablet. So if I do talk while I'm doing that and it's annoying, apologies in advance. I try to remember not to. Comparing what I've done to the reference image, mine is a little darker and a little bit more uniform rather than kind of the patchy style of the reference images. So I'm going to try and brighten it up, but in patches, to try and correct both of those things. Since I know the Chupacabra is going to be right here, rather than trying to add the shadow in later when I'm adding the Chupacabra, I think this style being kind of sketchy allows for me to estimate where I think it's going to go and once I add the Chupacabra in, and I'm just gonna avoid putting any of these brighter lines in that area just so that it looks like it's already got a shadow. And I think that'll make it feel a bit more organic too, rather than trying to erase some of these lines later and having potentially hard edges and things. Now that I have the picture upright again, I can see a little bit, from a different perspective where some things don't look quite right, where maybe I'm a little bit too patchy or a little too regular in the patterns. Like I have these kind of 3 sections right next to each other that all end right at the same spot that feel too regular for this kind of sketchy pattern. So I'm going to go over those a bit and try to refine this just a tad. I guess if I were to try and explain what it is I'm hoping to accomplish by using a reference artist like this, it would be to, for me it's just to learn, but as far as how I want the art piece to look in regards to this artist, I'd like it to be to the point where if somebody were to see my piece next to the artist's work, they wouldn't be able to tell that it wasn't the artist that did it. I think that is kind of like the mark of success for me for trying to emulate an art style. And sometimes I feel like I'm not capturing it at all. I might not understand how they're getting the look that they're getting for certain aspects. And in those cases, I'll just usually take what I ended up with in attempting to emulate them and sort of treat it like new style that I managed to end up with by using their inspiration as a starting off point. And I won't consider it like a failure. I will consider it like I didn't manage to emulate their style to the level that I set out to when I started, but I still consider it a success if I end up with something that I like, even if it doesn't look like what I was trying to get at the start. Okay, so mine might be a bit more sketchy and blotchy, I guess, than the original I'm trying to emulate. I could probably spend a lot more time refining it to make it closer and closer, but this technique is a bit time consuming, and all I've got so far is the road. I still have ways to go, and I've already been drawing for nearly an hour, so I'm gonna move on. I'm using these Mark Burnett brushes from the YouTuber Mark Burnett. Try to remember to put a link up at this point in the video. He has really useful art videos and often gives away free brush packs. So I think what I'm gonna do here is stop putting in this light on this surface because I'm going to be adding in the character running. They're definitely not going to be in this really quick pose that I threw in here. I'm going to try and refine that a bit. So it's going to be a little harder to say where I need to put the shadow, and I want to do it similar to how I did the shadow for the Chupacabra, where it's just leaving out an area rather than cutting it out later. So I'm going to move on from this and come back to it later. As I'm working through these things, it is fairly tiring doing this kind of art for a long period of time. It's kind of taxing on the brain, I guess. So doing the focal point stuff early on might be a better idea while I'm still kind of at higher peak performance levels, I guess, rather than waiting until closer to the end when I'm starting to wind down and make more mistakes and care less about stuff. So let's do the characters first here. Come back to the lights and mountains and grass and sidewalks and buildings last. So for this character, I don't have much reference for how this person does the character other than this one laying down. Let's see if I can find some more. Let me just quickly Google the artist's name and see what comes up. The one issue with Googling is you don't always have 100% certainty that what you're finding is done by that artist without a fair bit of research. But okay, I found an image that's actually pretty close to what I'm already doing, which is kind of nice. I think I'm going to use this as reference for how to do this character. And it seems like this artist isn't a really big fan of doing faces. Most of the time they seem to be obscured or removed. There are some that come up with faces when I Google the name. The art style is different enough that I'm not confident in putting it up and claiming that it is this artist doing it. so I'm probably gonna have to kind of wing it as far as face goes. But I think what I can do is maybe give them like a baseball cap or something, and since the light is shining from above, I can obscure most of their face in shadow that way, and I won't have to spend as much time on it. I think to make them look a little bit more scared, I can give them a less proper running posture, you know, rather than, say, having this arm elbow up, arm down like that, like you might see a runner doing. I could have it, you know, more down and back and kind of almost like it's flailing, and it makes it feel less in control. And I think to continue that idea of out of control, if you're running, having this leg go kind of out will help. If I do that, I think maybe having this other leg go more vertical will make it feel like they're kind of almost tipping over as they run. This arm does feel a little too in control right now, so I'm going to try adjusting it a tad. I think having less of a 90-degree bend in the elbow probably will help. And proportions-wise, I feel like the hips are too big compared to the upper torso, and the legs might be slightly too short, but let's try adjusting that a bit. If I leave the legs smaller, it can add to the perspective if I just maybe rotate them back even further, so it's like the character's leaning right towards the camera. I think that's a decent running pose. I think maybe their head is too big now. It looks like for the character, it might not be line art, it might be the whole thing is painted black, the whole silhouette is painted black and then color painted into it almost up to the edges. It's the feeling I get from how the actual edge lines look. They don't look like they're drawn on. They look like they kind of come about from color going up to the edge. That would be my guess anyway, my assumption. Who knows if I'm right, but that's what I'm gonna do to try and emulate it. So again, I'm probably gonna use a mask for this to make things a little easier. I think before I do this, since I'm trying to get the whole base shape into this, just the mask first, I need a bit more detail on how like the actual silhouette is going to look, which means I need some idea of the clothing in the sketch layer, I think. Maybe I'll make the fingers a little bit more wild to show the lack of control in this running in fear. Pretty tempted to just use the same color as this character on here, the red, but I guess that is seemingly a stylistic choice that's pretty consistent throughout a lot of the works. Characters usually have this kind of red clothing, backdrops are often this kind of blue, so I probably will. I was thinking of doing it, blue clothing on the character too to keep the tone consistent throughout, but it does seem like the style choice for this artist is often to have the foreground element complementary color, red on blue usually, so I'm going to do that. Now the technique and tool on the used on the person seems quite different than the ground, but it might just be more careful use of the same tool. One problem I'm going to have is that my light source is coming from above, whereas in this reference image it's more like headlights, so the light is pretty dead on this character, and I need to have dark under parts and shadows casting downwards, which was going to be a little bit difficult, but I'll do my best to get that to work. Even if I'm not getting the style totally emulated correctly, I do really like how this is turning out. I've never tried shading with these Mark Burnett pencil line art brushes before, but it is is quite nice looking. It's good, good process, works out better than I expected. Now, if I'm being honest with what I was talking about earlier about where to draw the line with emulating other artists, and I was talking about color picking and how I am color picking from this artist's work for this piece, and it makes things a lot easier and quicker. But I do think I'm doing myself a bit of a disservice with that, because one thing that I do struggle with often is color theory stuff. I know some of it in a very much like theory sense, but in practice I don't have a lot of practice in actually doing the legwork to pick the right colors for whatever piece I'm working on, and relying on the artist's work like I'm doing here to give me the right colors. It does teach me a fair bit about what works and what doesn't, but it's still not giving me the practice in actually making those decisions myself. So that's something I feel like I should try to work on more, probably consciously in the future. Maybe Inktober isn't the best time for it because of the time crunch stuff. Again, starting to kind of run low on time, or not necessarily low, but taking longer than planned again. At least much more happy with my outcome so far compared to yesterday. It's working out a lot better. Turns out emulating another style can really kind of set you on the right path rather than you having to kind of try and work it all out yourself. Yesterday's took a long time and wasn't very good, which is kind of double whammy of unfortunate. I liked the concept, but did not feel like I managed the execution to the level I wanted it. And this time, I'm really glad I decided to do this character earlier, because it is taking a while, and my brain is starting to get tired. Most likely going to start kind of wanting to cut corners, do things quicker, and saving that for when I start doing the backdrop is one of the smarter things I've done today. Perhaps even the smartest. Here's where I'm going to have to start considering how this arm is casting a shadow on the body. I think I'm going to do that by just kind of doing like a sharp-ish line like that. Shoulder is kind of, I think it's too high up, so this is where having that clipping mask comes in real handy. So I can just go whoop. Suddenly his shoulder is not quite so big. Looks a little bit more normal, human, hopefully. In later videos and stuff, I might talk more about composition as far as lines of action, lines that draw the eye. This image has a little bit. Mostly it was kind of unconsciously I put it into the image, almost accidentally, and I think that mostly comes from using perspective. I use the perspective ruler, and that adds in some lines kind of by default. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but what you generally want is lines on your image to kind of point towards your focal point. I have a bit of that. I can show you kind of what's going on here. If I turn my background back on and my sketch layer. So because I'm having the creature here, I want that to be a pretty big focal point, and then I have my character here that I want to be a fairly big focal point. Well, actually, I think the creature is probably going to be the main thing. I do want you to see the character being scared, but all attention should kind of focus to this creature. And because I use perspective lines, I have all these lines pointing inward like this. This road is pointing in, the horizon line is pointing in. This character, a lot of their lines will kind of pull the eye kind of flowing in that direction. Even the shadow lines are kind of pointing that direction. The folds on the clothing are pointing in that direction. The boot, the leg, it's all kind of pulling towards that creature. And even kind of, I guess accidentally, the light here behind the creature will kind of pull the eye a bit, because it'll be a high contrast spot compared to the dark around it. And then if I have the creature's eyes glowing as well, that should draw the eye. So I mean, I kind of almost lucked into it in this case, especially with how the character pose and wrinkles on the clothing worked pointing in that direction. So this one compositionally ended up actually like pretty decent, mostly by accident. But yeah, that's the kind of idea behind lines of motion and things. For the Chupacabra, I was already planning on making it almost entirely silhouetted, aside from just the glowing eyes and maybe a bit of rim light, which is partly why I decided to do it second after the person, even though it's more of a focal point. It's because I knew it was going to be harder to do the character with all of their clothing and everything, and then being in a bright light. I like the idea of it being vaguely bear-shaped based on the description that I looked at earlier. So I'm going to try and kind of capture some of that. I'm not going to bother looking at reference for how a bear moves. I have enough of a general idea in my head for vibes for how a bear moves that I can work off that, and any place where I get it wrong is just going to fit into the fact that it isn't actually a bear. It's some Chupacabra creature. I want to keep this part of the silhouette where the claw is kind of bent backwards like a bear walk. So I'm going to try and push this leg into the background more. And it might not make a whole lot of sense for the sort of gait that a bear has when it walks. I think generally most things with four legs will tend to have it alternate which leg goes forward, which leg goes back. So like in this case, because its right arm is going forward, its left arm is going back, really the left leg should be going forward and the right leg should be going back. But sometimes things walk like that. I can't actually remember how it works with a bear. It might even be this way, where they kind of left side forward, right side back on both sets. In any case, if it isn't like this, like I said, weird otherworldly creature, maybe it just walks weird. Who am I to judge this poor Chupacabra? Maybe it's just hungry and it's looking for some blueberries. Maybe Chupacabras aren't vampiric, eating goats, drinking goat blood. Maybe they're just looking for berries. Do I want these spines to be like barbed? Maybe? Nah. Not only is it harder to do, it's also a little bit too much visual noise, and I don't think logically, from a biological perspective, if you have spines on your back, I don't think you want them barbed, because then you just get whatever's trying to jump on you or bite you or whatever just gets stuck on there. I think you want it to just injure them and have them die and fall off, right? Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. Let's give it some glowing red eyes. Red's kind of the cliche, but red is cool. Because I really want these eyes to be the focal point of this image. I'm going to make them one of the brightest points in the image too. Okay, back to the background, and hopefully getting close to being done. Still probably going to be a bit. This might end up being another 4-hour project. I've noticed that as I'm recording these, as I go on, I tend to slowly get quieter and quieter as I'm trying to narrate things, and as I get more tired, and I guess I want to say apologies for that. I'm trying to get better at keeping my energy up while narrating, still kind of figuring it out. So I'd say overall, I feel like I mostly redeemed myself from yesterday. I wasn't a big fan of how yesterday's turned out, and I feel like this one worked out a lot better. The character himself that's running doesn't necessarily fit the style that I was trying to emulate super well, but I think I'm overall really happy with how this turned out as just an art piece, regardless of emulating that artist style. And then I'll call that done. So, thank you for watching me explore another hobby. Like and subscribe if that's the kind of thing you want to do, and have a good one.